Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guest, Eric Anderton, executive coach and host of fellow podcast, Construction Genius. Our episode is focused on Eric's mantra, never settle. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you can hear from the experts about key topics to help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, a senior director with Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host, Mike Diercksen, our senior consultant of innovation and content solutions. Our guest today and fellow podcast host and industry thought leader is Eric Anderton. Eric is a business and executive coach, as well as the host of his own podcast, Construction Genius. Eric, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. I really appreciate you guys having me on the show. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're excited. Mike, how about yourself? How are you this morning?
Doing great, Chris. Excited to speak with Eric and get another podcaster on the show. I think it'll be our first podcast-to-podcast discussion.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good one. So, Eric, thanks again for joining our show today. Definitely a pleasure to connect with you. Before we dive into our main topic, could you tell us a little bit about your background and your career and how you got to where you are in the podcast today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started off my career in sales. I sold mainly copy machines for the first 10 or so years of my career. So I've made tens of thousands of cold calls and been rejected a bunch of times, but successful doing that. And then one day at a networking event, I ran into a gentleman who sold a leadership development program in the area that I live in Sacramento, California. Leadership development is something that I've always been interested in. I'm a history major. I have a degree in history, and so I'm always interested in people and the development of people and all those kinds of things. And so I went to work for him selling the leadership development program. And in 2004, my first client was a construction company, and they're still my client today. And then I worked with that until about 2010. I launched my own gig in 2013, and I work almost exclusively now with construction company owners and executives, although I do have one insurance company client.
Very nice. Maybe we could introduce you to a few more there, get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And Eric, you mentioned one of your first clients being in a construction company, and was there something that drew you to them, or what was it that led you to develop Construction Genius? Is it just a mindset, or what about the construction industry in particular?
Well, I think it's that I resonated with construction companies because I think a couple of things. Number one, I'm a fairly straightforward, simple guy, and I find that a lot of people in construction are straightforward and direct people, and so I appreciate that. Another thing is that I have a deep respect for construction because I believe that what construction does is extremely profound. Because number one, you're building buildings, roads, infrastructure that people use every day. So construction has a tremendous positive impact on the lives of the whole society. But in addition to that, a construction company that's well run has a tremendous impact on the employees and their families. And that idea of building both people and projects is something that really appeals to me. And combine that with my own personal mindset of simpleness and directness, and those things working together have really drawn me into the construction industry.
Nice. Yeah, I could definitely speak to that as the son of a construction exec myself. There's something tangible about building that, something we've talked about in the past on the show. You look at a plot of land and it turns into a building, and there's something very rewarding, tangible of saying, I built that,
see, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone that has worked in the construction industry, if you drive past one of their projects, they are going to gush about, did you know this and this? And it could be the most regular looking building to you, but to them, it's, hey, this was something we did and we achieved this, and it's a great feeling.
Yeah, that's tremendous.
Yeah. Well, excellent. So Eric, the construction industry is always in need of critical thinkers, and with innovation, it's really taking off, right? We have people who are really bringing to the forefront technology, new ways of approaching this field, and it brings us to our main topic, which is to never settle. And this is a mantra I know that you live by, and that I want, if you could, share what that means to you with our audience.
Yeah, so I think whether you're $1 million, $10 million, or $1 billion in revenue, the best construction businesses have one thing in common, and that is they focus on their people first. And so this idea of never settle has everything to do with getting the right people in the right positions in your company so that you can build projects profitably, safely, and on or before the schedule is due. And the idea of never settle, it's similar to the idea of a GM from a sports franchise, be it baseball, football, basketball. You have a schedule of games that you have to play, and therefore you have to field the team, but you're never satisfied with your roster. You're always thinking about how can I either develop people that are on my team currently or find people who are a better fit for my team. And you're always looking to develop the people on your team or bring in the people that you need in order to be able to perform at the highest level. And that mindset of never settle is the same mindset that construction company owners and executives need to bring to the table when they're developing their people and developing their teams.
As a baseball fan, I love that analogy, Eric, and it's a common theme from our guests. Oftentimes we hear about people in the industry struggling with implementation of those type strategies, especially as it relates to people, because it hasn't always been a focus of this particular industry, right? I mean, it's a lot of times we do put a lot more focus on the building and materials, and you forget about the people. Can you give us an example, maybe of a time that you helped coach an executive? Don't feel like you got to name names or anything like that, but sometime that kind of brought about that change where you did have successful outcome.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting because we know from, we know from studying sports that what separates the elite athletes from just the average performers isn't necessarily athletic ability, but it's their mindset. It's the mindset that they adopt and the way they approach their craft and what they bring to the table every time they step onto the field. And so I was working with a gentleman who was promoted from a project manager level into a project executive or area manager type level. So this person is in a senior role. And when they first stepped into that role, they were then invited into the executive meetings with the president and the chief operating officer of the organization. And there was a sense of insecurity that they had as they stepped into those meetings. And their mindset was, I'm not good enough. Even though they'd been with the company for a while and they had performed very well as a project manager and they'd been promoted because of their potential, he still had that mindset, I'm not good enough. And what that mindset led to was a specific action. And that action was not participating in those executive meetings and avoiding conflict, avoiding bringing up his opinions and his insights to share in those meetings. Now, he got a payoff from that. That payoff was that he was comfortable. He was comfortable in that position, but then he also got a negative payoff, and that was regret, because he went out of those meetings thinking, man, I've been promoted. I'm here to make a contribution, but I'm not making that contribution because I don't think I'm good enough. So we clearly identified this. And so it was really neat. He had to drop the mask a little bit and be open with me. And when he was open with me, we then worked on replacing that mindset of I'm not good enough with a different mindset. And it wasn't I am good enough. It was I care about the success of the company. So I'm stepping into the executive meetings now, not consumed with myself and my own perception of myself, but with this idea, I want to contribute to the success of the company. And so that was his mindset. His action then, which I held him accountable for, was actively engaging in the meetings, getting prepared for those meetings. For instance, he struggled sometimes with the financials, understanding them at a deeper level. So he really committed to studying those financials so that when he stepped into that executive meeting, he had something to share, insights to bring to the table. And his payoff from that was he came out of those meetings with a tremendous sense of self-worth, and an understanding he had made his contribution, and the fact that other people now perceived him as being worthy of the role that they had given him. So we worked a lot on replacing that negative mindset of I'm not good enough with that alternative mindset, I care about the success of the company, and then focused on the action of engaging in meetings. And that was a tremendous transformation for him.
That's interesting too. That it's not exactly, I would say, the polar opposite of just flipping to I am good enough. That's an interesting divergence, I guess, in mindset to prepare him for that role and it's a great example, and it sounds like one I read the book. Sounds like you've been able to repeat that pretty consistently, and I imagine there's a lot of nuance between, say, that particular client and the next one that walks through the door that you may be engaged by. Is there a common theme with people who come to you looking, who are maybe struggling implementing those concepts?
Well, there's a common theme for a lot of people when they become leaders in construction, because what happens is, if they're project managers or a superintendent and they move up to, let's say, a general superintendent role or project executive, or even, and this is interesting too, even the president of the organization, what happens is they have to make the shift from building projects to building people. And I remember many years ago, I was talking to the senior executive in an extremely large general contractor, a nationally known one. And that was what he identified as the main challenge people have, is making that shift from building projects to building people. And that's the one thing I see. And so what I see with people who get promoted into leadership or who have been in leadership for a long time is they struggle with micromanagement, they struggle with delegation, they struggle with communication. And they're technically sound, but they just have challenges in allowing other people to step into roles that they're so used to filling themselves.
That's really resonated with me, Eric, because I find that in my professional experience, people get promoted based off the last job they did, right? And you were very good at the last job. That doesn't always mean that you're prepared for the next job. So to that end, speaking of, okay, I am a very good builder and I am a very proficient project executive. I run a good project. I can get the nuts and bolts done well. But when you step into that executive role and now you're into more of a people building, like you're saying, that there is it's a different skill set, really, and one that I think just because you were good at building doesn't mean you're necessarily the best at communicating and helping others be good builders.
And it's really interesting, because one of the things I really help my clients with is the fact that they're either perfectionists, or they don't trust people, or they like being the hero, right? And perfectionism is a big issue, right? Because you're in the position you're in because you're very good at what you do. And the fact is that you're probably better than the people who report to you at what you do in many cases. But what you've got to understand is, instead of being that perfectionist, you have to understand what good enough means. Now, what I mean by that isn't that you just settle for sloppiness and laziness, but you have to identify what is good enough and who decides what's good enough. And at the end of the day, our clients are the one who decide what's good enough. And if my people can execute the projects at a sufficient level to bring that to the clients, then I don't need to be stepping in all the time with my perfectionist attitudes or my heroic attitudes. I can teach my people to be the heroes, and I can teach them to perform at a sufficient level so that the projects get executed on time and on budget in a safe way.
Different take on good enough, but I think it's a smart one, Eric.
Yeah.
So in your mind, then, with your experience, what do you think makes a good leader, right? Like, what is allowing certain firms and individuals to thrive while others are struggling? Is it really just as simple as recognizing those things?
I think one of the one thing that sets apart good leaders from bad leaders is simply their communication skills. Mm-hmm. And I've developed a very simple framework that I'm always slightly embarrassed sharing it because it's a little cheesy. It's called the EAR framework, right? So all you guys got to do is you grab your ear and you think, how is ear spelled? Well, it's spelled EAR. And all you have to do is to grab your ear in order to remember the 3 messages that you need to communicate as a construction leader every single day to the people who report to you. The E, that stands for encouragement. The A is accountability. And the R is recognition. So as a leader, you must always be communicating 3 messages: encouragement, accountability, recognition. Now, let me just explain that in a little more detail. Encouragement, that stands, when you're encouraging someone, you're telling them you can do it. You can do it. When you're holding them accountable, you're asking them, did you do it? And then when you're recognizing them, you're telling them you did it. So those are the 3 things you need to be working with your team on every day. You can do it. Did you do it? You did it. And it's just, I know it's very straightforward. It's very simple. But the fact is a lot of people neglect that. They don't put their arm around someone and give them the training and the resources they need, and then look them in the eye and say, hey, dude, you can do it. So go out there and do it. And then of course, they don't hold them accountable. The best leaders struggle with accountability. And we need to get expert at accountable conversations where we're looking people in the eye and saying, hey, did you do it? If not, can you tell me why? And how can I help you? That's an accountable conversation right there. And then when someone achieves and they do well, and again, we're in construction, so we're in a performance business. We're not in recreational sports here. So if they achieve beyond what the level of acceptability is, then you recognize them. You say you did it. And you recognize them personally, you recognize them consistently, and you customize your recognition for how they like to be recognized, whether it's in public or in private. So it's very important that you communicate those messages consistently.
Shifting gears a little bit, Eric, there's something you mentioned in our last conversation that I know would be very interesting to a large portion of our audience. Because a lot of firms, especially GCs, they all want to grow and be profitable, and oftentimes they struggle with that rapid expansion. And you had offered up, and I know you touch on, well, you don't touch on it. You go into some detail in the book about this, it's a unique way to evaluate the risks by breaking them down into a couple of areas, but 3 scenarios. It's right client, right project, and right location. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think there's a large portion of our audience would love to get your take on that.
Absolutely. Well, we all know in construction, and companies don't struggle because of the projects they don't take on. They struggle because of the projects they do take on. That's why people go bankrupt, right? They go bankrupt overeating as opposed to starving. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Now, and it's so essential because those three parameters: right client, right project, right location. If you're going to be successful in construction, ideally, you'll nail 3 out of the 3 on every single project you do. Now, we know that that's not necessarily realistic in every situation. For instance, you might want to be expanding your business to another geography. So you're unfamiliar with that location. You're unfamiliar. You don't necessarily have relationships with the labor force on the ground, but it's the right type of project, and a client that you trust and you've worked with is taking you there. So you're going to take the leap, right? And so when you're expanding the business, you have to hit at least 2 out of the 3 of those parameters: right client, right project, right location. And if you don't have at least 2 of the 3, you can be assured that most likely you're going to be losing money. So you have to discipline yourself. You have to go away from the shiny toy syndrome where, some killer project comes up and you want to put your sign on the project so people go down the street and they say, ooh, look at that company building that project. You've got to get away from that, because construction you don't get successful in construction by being flashy. You get successful by being consistent and by consistently developing and building the right projects in the right location with the right people. So you must have that sense of discipline.
Yeah, and speaking of with the right people, I imagine that focus, you turn that internal to the construction company too. And there's another interesting facet of your book, and thank you for the advanced copy, by the way. I tore through that pretty quickly, and it was a great read. But a piece that I think when I was reading it, I recognized a piece that's not intuitive to a lot of contractors, especially as they're trying to grow, is the progression that you kind of lay out, concentrating on leadership first, strategy second, and then sales marketing third, and they jump right to that third, let's get the flashy sign on the building, as opposed to concentrating on their core competencies and strategies and leadership. Why do you think so many GCs, and I guess probably not even limited to the construction industry, but seems to be super prevalent, why do GCs struggle with that and kind of misprioritizing those focus areas?
I think because there's pressure, right? So you're running a business, and you've got to build up the backlog. You've got to feed the bulldog, so to speak, right? You've got a payroll, and you've got people to pay. And so it can be challenging at times, because if I don't pay my people, then they'll go work somewhere else. I need to get, my cash flow going so that I can keep my business going. I can meet my overhead and all these kinds of things. So that pressure builds up. And that's why I think in construction, it's important to be able to start slow or start with those relationships in place. For instance, one of my clients is an extremely large general contractor, and when they launched their business, they came with a ton of experience from another general contractor, but then also an established relationship with their first client. And so based on that established relationship, they could take on projects that they knew that they could build and build their backlog quickly. And so it really depends on the circumstances that you're in. And you nail it, that you can look externally and have right client, right project, right location, but then you've also got to build that team internally and make sure that you have the right people in your company on the project so that you can execute in a manner that is profitable. So it's essential that you take that two-sided approach. And again, in my mind, it's better to go slow than to go too fast and fail miserably. It's better to take incremental steps to improvement than to try and do everything all at once and then fail and get discouraged.
Yeah, no, certainly, Eric. I think a lot of firms that maybe had some negative experiences would agree in hindsight that could have been a better approach. But one thing we like to do on the show, we like to give our audience at least 3 takeaways. We've had a lot of good, interesting conversations so far. I'm wondering, if I'm listening for the first time, if I'm a GC, an owner, insurance company, what should my 3 takeaways be from today's conversation?
I think number 1, never settle. Okay, this is what happens many times. Let's say you've identified a project manager and a project executive you want to bring on, and you hire them, and you go, phew, my work's done. No. Your work has only just begun. You're onboarding that person. You must dedicate the first 90 days to making sure that that person is onboarded successfully. Now, you may delegate that to somebody else, but the point is you shouldn't just wipe your brow and get back to your real job, because your real job is developing the people that you have in your organization and leading the people, because you can get the best projects in the world. You can have really great clients, but if your people aren't growing and developing, then you won't be able to consistently build a company that is successful. So never settle. And what that means is you listen, one of the things, this really gets me mad when I'm working with my clients. And I say this to them, it's like they're talking to me and they're saying, Eric, I got a problem with this guy. He's been with my company for so many years. We love him to death, but you know what? He pisses people off all the time. And I'm like, okay, now listen, if you're going to continue to have him in the organization, he has to change, right? Yeah, he has to change. Okay, now you're going to hold him accountable for the changes, right? Yeah, I'm going to hold him accountable. So if he doesn't change and he's still with your company in 6 months, do I have your permission to yell at you? Because the problem that a lot of construction companies have is they hold on to their people too long, and they allow people who are toxic to stay in their company. And then the reply to that often is, now hold on a minute, Eric, you can't say that because I still have these projects to build. Yes, I know you have the projects to build, and you need people to build those projects. But if you have the never settle mentality, you're noting the people who are not a good fit for your organization, and you are then proactively either looking to help them to develop, if that's possible, or proactively looking to replace them. And you're not just saying, well, there's nobody out there. I know the competition for talent, competition for talent is massive, but you just have to have that mindset. I'm always looking for the right people to put into the right positions in my organization. So that never settle mentality. The second one is the importance of one-to-one meetings with your folks. And I make a big deal about this. And again, this is a challenge for a lot of construction executives because they're so busy. If you want to develop your people, if you want to improve your communication, you must have regular one-on-one meetings with them. And that can be every week or every other week. And they should be 30 to 60 minutes. And in those one-on-one meetings, the person you're meeting with should set the agenda. They should come to the table with challenges they have, wins that they've had, questions that they have, and you should be sitting with them and making sure that you're helping them to overcome their obstacles. You're giving them direction and mentorship. You're creating in those one-on-one meetings an oasis. And hopefully they respect you and they like you enough so that they want to meet with you and get your insights, because between the one-on-one meetings, the oasis of the meeting we're having today and the one that we're going to have in a couple of weeks, there's this desert of the project challenges that they have. And they're walking through that desert for a week or two, and they need to get to that oasis so that they can be refreshed, they can be renewed in the way that they think, they can be challenged in terms of how they're building their projects. And those one-on-one meetings are absolutely essential. And then the third thing is to incorporate the ear framework every day. And like I said, I know it's a little cheesy, right? You grab your ear to remember, but it's really straightforward. You must encourage people. You must Put your arm around them and say to them every day, you can do it. You must hold them accountable. You should look at them in the eye and ask them, did you do it? And then you must recognize them. You must recognize when they perform at a high level and make sure that you're telling them you did it. Those are the three things. Never settle, consistent one-on-one meetings, and use that EAR framework every day.
It's really refreshing. I mean, you speak with such a passion, Eric, and it's clear this means a lot to you, and it's definitely something that is attainable, right? With the right mindset, you really can elevate those around you and yourself to achieve some of these things.
Yep.
And with that, so as well as the takeaways, we always like to give an action item as well. So again, if I'm a GC owner, insurance company, you name it, if I'm a listener today, and I'm thinking about, okay, I want to take that first step. Where do I go from here? What's the first thing I can do in order to be a better leader, to never settle? What would that be?
Well, it's interesting, right? There's that old saying that tell me who your 5 closest friends are, and I'll tell you what you're like. We are the people who we hang out with. What's really interesting is show me your calendar, and I'll show you, and I'll be able to tell you how effective you are as a leader. Okay, and one thing that I've just really come to this conclusion in the last, I'd say year or two, is that time management is really not where we need to focus. We need to focus on calendar management. And as a leader, one thing that you have to embrace in construction is the fact that much of your time is going to be fairly chaotic, right? Because you come into the office and, stuff hits the fan, and you're dealing with stuff throughout the day. And what you have to do is give yourself permission for that chaos, and to embrace it and to get into it and to allow it to happen. But then what you need to do is manage your calendar effectively so that you can lead. And that's where time blocking comes in. So for instance, this idea of the one-on-one meetings, I was talking to one of my clients recently who's a senior executive in a construction company. And he looked at his calendar and we worked through this, and he identified Mondays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. as the time block that he was going to use for his one-on-one meetings. Because at 10 a.m., the guys got started at 7 in the morning on the job site or something like that. So stuff's already happening. He's already talked to people and made sure that things are going. And then he has that block from 10 to 2 o'clock to meet with his direct reports and make sure he's creating that oasis. So the one thing I would do is I would really focus in on calendar management. And when you set aside time blocks, either to meet with your people or to work on customer relationships or to work on bigger picture planning, then discipline yourself to say no to people. When people say, are you available? You just say, no, I'm not available. Okay. And that the more you discipline yourself to manage your calendar and set aside those time blocks for the high priority items, the more control you will gain, the more effective you'll become as a leader. And then when you do get into the chaos of the day-to-day activities, you'll be okay with that because you know that you've got a time block for the more important things or the other aspects of your leadership later on in the week or later on in the day.
It's doubly important, I think, in construction. You really can't understate how much chaos gets generated. Project management is really problem solving. It's just people coming to you with issue after issue after issue, and you got to collaborate around how to fix those. But that seems like great advice for blocking off time, being able to manage around things that we know happen. It's not a one-off thing. That particular issue might be a one-off problem, but the way they're handled is pretty consistent. They're going to continue to occur. So that's great feedback and great advice. Eric, before we let you go, we generally like to hit our guests with a few rapid fire questions at the end, and we're pulling up on the end here. What is it you see today that gets you energized about going to work in the morning and doing the podcast and writing the book, and what gets you out of bed in the morning?
It's developing people. I love the fact that in the construction industry, you have some of the smartest, hardest working people in the world. And that the construction industry is a broad field where lots of people can fit and lots of people can thrive. And one thing that I just love doing, and I do this consistently, is working with the young men and women who are just stepping into new executive roles. Perhaps they've been in the industry for 10 years, maybe 15. They're in their early 30s to mid 30s, and they're stepping into these leadership roles. And they're really enthusiastic about the industry, and they're really looking to develop themselves. And I love working with those people. And then the other group of people I like working with is the senior executives. And I'm really excited with the fact that a lot of the older folks who they know that they have, let's say, another 10 or 15 years in their career, they want to be able to successfully transition their business. And they're looking in the mirror and they're saying, I need to get started on this right now. I need to build my succession plan. I need to start developing my next generation of leaders. And I'm going to take that bull by the horns, take responsibility for the legacy of my organization, and really take steps to make sure that my company not only thrives today, but in the future as well.
Yeah, and that's there's a large part of the industry that it seems never really thinks about that, or at least doesn't have the foresight to start thinking about that, 10, 15 years before pulling up on that milestone. So, and given that you speak with a wide array of executives and leaders within the industry, you probably have a lot of insight there, I would imagine, from those GCs. What do you think the industry is going to look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years based on your interactions with your client base?
Well, I think that the major issues that we're going to have to address and will continue to address are challenges with the labor force, challenges with productivity. Those issues never go away. So I think those problems are going to continue to be worked on. For my podcast, I've interviewed a number of executives who are involved in technology companies that are bringing to the construction industry a variety of different technologies that solve specific problems. I think that as we go through the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a continuing leverage of technology, but there's also an understanding that use of technology is limited because in many situations, construction is unique. Every single project's unique, and you need people on the ground who are highly skilled installing the work. So I see that continued growth of the leverage of technology. I see in the next 5 to 10 years, we know that we're going to hit some sort of significant downturn, I think. I thought it was going to happen earlier this year. I just had that sense. It kind of was like this, and then but it's coming. And so what I think that's going to do, and I think this is really important, it's going to shake the industry out of the B and the C players, definitely the C players, and it's going to really make the emphasis on the high Bs and the A players. And so I see a real need for construction companies to attract, develop, and retain those A players and really make that commitment in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think everyone across every industry is definitely looking for that, but certainly, Eric, getting the A talent is a priority right now.
Yep.
So with that, as we're starting to wrap this up, again, this is the Building Bite podcast. That is building insurance technology with the experts. You are today's expert. We like to ask our guests, what are you taking a bite out of today? Is there a local spot in Sacramento that is your favorite, or what's on the menu?
What's on the menu for me and my family is Zelda's Gourmet Pizza. It's a dive bar in downtown Sacramento, and they do deep dish pizza, and it is awesome. And we don't go out to eat too much, but when we do, we like to order Zelda's, and we go pick it up and bring it back to the house. And it's excellent pizza. So if you're ever in Sacramento and you want a deep dish pizza, go to Zelda's Original Gourmet Pizza on 21st Street.
The guy that grew up in New Jersey and lived in Brooklyn for a long time, I have a hard time saying, okay, I'll go have pizza anywhere else, because I find it's disappointing most times. But I'd be willing to try that out. It sounds deep dish pizza in California.
Yep, it's really good actually, and it's old school too. That's the thing. It's not like California sort of cuisine with little tiny bites and all this kind of stuff. No, it's good, greasy, deep dish pizza.
Exactly what you want it to be, right?
Exactly, man.
Well, we're coming up on lunchtime here, and now I'm hungry. I'm ready to clock out. Eric, thank you again for being with us today. We appreciate you taking the time. If our listeners want to hook up with you, where can they find you and the new book? And when's the release date?
Release date is October 20th. And so you can find the book at constructiongeniusbook.com. And we'll have that page live. We're recording this at the end of September. That page will be live here in the next couple of weeks, but constructiongeniusbook.com. And the name of the book is Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS, Leadership, Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. And then you can always find me on LinkedIn. Just go, if you search Eric Anderton, I'm all over the place on LinkedIn. And then, of course, you can go to my website, constructiongenius.com.
Fantastic. Thank you again for joining us, and look forward to chatting with you again real soon, and good luck with the book.
Thank you, Chris, Mike. I appreciate you having me on the show. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.